Folks who are just joining us, the big question I want you to think about are, I guess, two big questions. First is, where are you joining us from? Let us know where you're joining us from. And second question, the most important one for today is, what caused World War One? What caused World War One? All right, and our chat is filling up. This is lovely. Got folks from all over the country. And I don't know if I knew you were in Cadillac, Michigan. Is the Cadillac associated with that city? I mean, that's my guess, but I could be wrong. I want to
They're
fun
named after the same explorer. I'm just gonna throw it out there and say we're not as fancy as the luxury car brand. Owning that.
I love it. No, the good folk of Michigan, they are down home folks. They are nice, as you can tell from their award-winning smiles, all of them. It is a fantastic place.
You might want to come to my second hour. I don't know.
Okay, more folks are joining the fun. I love it. Couple new ideas. Okay, folks, we are going to start exactly on time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but if you're someone who had joined us a little bit earlier, you got the message. If you just came to the party, two things I want you to start off doing in the chat. First, let us know where you're joining us from. Let us know where you're coming from. And for that second question, what caused World War One? What caused World War One? All right, so while folks are getting a moment or two to fill in the chat with those responses, I just want to take a moment and introduce myself. My name is Jason Wilkinson. I oversee professional development here at the OER Project, and I will be your facilitator tonight as we engage in a conversation about causation. As we go, feel free to drop any questions you might have into the chat. We'll have some moments throughout the session to take a step out and discuss or go a little bit deeper into some of the questions you might have. But just to keep track, we want to kind of go and pull in there. Also, I want to introduce you to our chat moderator for this evening, Megan. Since there's so many folks with their cameras on, which I love, Megan, you want to come off mute and say hello?
Hi, everybody. My name is Megan Suits, and I'm here tonight from New Jersey. I teach 7th and 8th grade world history, and I'm here to help Jason in the chat moderation.
Thank you very much for joining us. Megan, you are a pro. Looking forward to your support. So I'm going to give folks a second to check out the agenda for today and our objectives. Won't read those aloud to you, but I just want to give you an idea of what we're going to be doing today in our time together. First big objective is we really want to make sure you understand by the end of our time together the OER approach to causation, and one of the major tools we use that kind of helps support students in grappling with that as well. And the second objective I think is equally important is thinking about some of the ways you can implement causation skills, or specifically the causation tool, into your classroom, whether it's for an upcoming lesson or something a little bit further down the road that you can see a need for this tool to come into and support you. I would love to think about norms for a second. This is something that if you've joined us before, it's not a foreign idea, something that's brand new. The idea here is we really want to make sure we observe a set of norms that kind of help us understand how to best engage with each other. Again, won't read the whole thing to you. Just want you to read them and think about one that you really want to exemplify today. The one I would love, and the one I see folks doing really unprompted, is the cameras on. This is a virtual medium, obviously, but any opportunity to connect is always valued, and these cameras on, these moments to kind of see those eyes and those ears when you're sharing your ideas, it's really great. So we want to continue to support that. So if you have the ability, please turn your camera on so you can best engage with some of the other folks who have joined us tonight. All right, so let's go back to our do now, the Great War. I'm curious if I can get some folks to come off mute and to go a little bit deeper into their answers. So I'm going to cold call based upon some of the responses I see here. And I'm going to go first to, let's go with Denise Tomlinson. Denise, can you share with us your response? Well, first of all, let us know where you're coming from. And then also, can you share with us, based upon your background knowledge, what caused World War One?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I'm Denise Tomlinson. I'm from Bixby, Oklahoma. And you know, the standards that we teach here in our state and that are under, you know, our state standards are Maine: militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism.
Nice. Thorough. I was looking for a quick, kind of snappy answer. You hit me with the weight. I love it. Okay. Let's bounce around to someone else. I'm really curious what your thoughts are on topic, and don't let anyone's answer sway you. I'm just looking for some authenticity as well. But what caused World War One? Let's go with Sean Kahn, joining us from New Jersey.
How you doing?
Hey, how's it going? There we go.
So I would say I'm from Wayne, New Jersey, teaching 6th grade. So last year I was in 7th grade. We're teaching World War One, and basically I'd say the main cause will be all the alliances with European countries and militarism, I would say.
Nice. That is really close to the way I learned it myself. I think the kind of confusing array, the connections, the alliances that led from one thing to another was the way it kind of stuck in my head. But I'm always curious to hear other people's thoughts on how they see it all kind of breaking down. We'll go with one last person to kind of add some more weight to our thoughts here. What caused World War One? Let's go with Rhonda Fox from Bellevue, Florida. Rhonda, do you want to share with us?
Yeah, I'm from Bellevue. World War One really was caused by that expansionism, and Europe started to run out of places to expand, and all those conflicts and alliances and military growth.
I love it. Thank you, Rhonda. So why am I quizzing you about World War One? You know, I'm a history dork and I really enjoy it. But beyond that, there's something here that I think is helpful to kind of wrap our heads around before we jump into the session. What I heard folks kind of elaborate about is not just the causes of World War One in their perspective, but also how many different causes someone could isolate when they're thinking about such a massive event. It changed the world. It changed the way we thought about conflict, or at least the way folks who were alive at that time thought about conflict. So how do we best explain that? Folks kind of landed on a couple of different things. Everyone was identified, for the most part, more than just a single cause, a kind of collection of causes. And that's great. What we're seeing right there is that there is some different delineation when we're thinking about those causes together. There are things that are short-term, there's things that are a little bit more immediate. And then there's also things that are like long-term, lasting, things that kind of wrap in a variety of ideas, people, groups, and kind of come together to form a single idea when you're thinking about causation. I love that. That's leads to nuance, leads to a really great conversation in the classroom. And what we're going to do in this session is spend some time thinking about not just the ideas behind it, but some of the tools that help fuel that. If you're looking at a student population that might not be that familiar with the concept, or the ways to kind of suss it out, whether it's in discussion or in written work. So first, we're going to start off by talking about our approach to causation. This is really straightforward. The idea here is to lay out for you not just, Jay sit up here and riff it on causation, but some of the academic backing that leads us to not just the way we talk about it in our course, but the tools that we kind of put in our courses to support the way a student or a teacher kind of grapples with this idea. So I'm going to leave this up for a second so folks can check it out. Kind of a breakdown of the way we think about causation, or rather why it makes sense to address causation. But one of the big things I just want to kind of touch on here as we consider this idea, or rather this concept, is that when students are engaging in causation, they're going to have mixed results early on when it comes to grappling with this. One of the biggest missteps or kind of mistakes students typically make is monocausal thinking when it comes to big events, thinking that there's just one singular cause. And what we're hoping for in this tool and a couple other tools that are kind of scattered across our courses is to help take those ideas from the text or source and to kind of break it down to kind of give space to its component parts and allow students a chance to kind of think about, to engage with it with a partner or small groups, and ultimately land on a better understanding of what those ideas or events kind of speak to when you're looking at a larger event. Now, specifically for causation, what I want folks to also think about is that when historians are engaging in the causal thinking, or we're like diving into the bigger mysteries that kind of embody our exploration of world history or anything else, they ultimately have the same complications that students do. It's complicated to land on the causes, the steps that lead to this big thing or event. So we use the same tools that historians use. We just give it a graphic organizer and something for students to kind of write on, so you can lead it and offer feedback when needed. Best case scenario, we're getting them in a place where they're thinking like historians, but in that lead up, these tools are really supportive of the kind of things that historians are actively doing in their brains when they're looking at a text or looking at a news source. So this is an example of the tool that we use here. We're going to look at this a little bit more closely in a second, but I wanted to give a high-level overview of what's going on here. I touched on some of this stuff already, but the one thing I want to kind of note here is that writing about causation sometimes takes a little bit more time for folks to kind of wrap their heads around. So these tools don't automatically move from a pre-writing tool to actually, 5-paragraph essay, something like that. It may actually be something that lives on its own, or utilize on your own to help bring those big ideas out of its source without going further with that. Now, that's just kind of the starting block, not where you end. But we also understand that students are grappling with this just like anyone else is if it's a new concept. So giving them tools to kind of practice that is helpful as many times as you can. Also, we want to think about the fact that this helps build investigative fluency with students. It helps them apply those different lenses to data when they're using it to kind of analyze or think about these time periods. As you'll see on the bottom of the tool, when you get the chance to look at it later, we have an opportunity for students to look at the different lenses, whether it is, simply sorting into whether or not it was a short-term, long-term, immediate cause, helping them understand by labeling it with different identifiers that speak to the role, the significance, or type of cause. There's a lot of different layers that we kind of give space for folks to add to the exploration of the source with this tool, and utilizing this not just once and trying to get to everything, but kind of using this as like a building block, thinking about this in the context that it's a marathon, not a sprint. The first time a student uses this, it's okay to kind of scaffold and break it down to think about just a singular aspect of this or a singular lens. And when you revisit this with a different source and you keep on moving throughout the year, you can add different layers of that to help students get a fuller understanding of what it looks like to explore source and think about causation. Now, we don't think it's enough just for you to kind of hear me kind of wax poetic about a tool that we use here. We want to give you an opportunity to experience the tool as well. So I am going to lead us at least in the first part of an activity that we really, really love. If you're someone who's familiar with our courses, you may have come across this activity before. If you're not, then you're in for a treat. This is one of our favorites, or at least one of my favorites. I can't speak to everyone else. Megan, is this one of your favorites? I think so. Yeah, there we go. So that's at least two people. That's the core, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by telling you about a tragic story, a sad story. It breaks me up every time I think about this poor guy. Unfortunately, this story ends in a death. And what I want you to do as you listen to the story is I want you to think about the causes. Listen for the causes that I kind of articulate for you about this poor camel and his eventual death. And if you have around you, scribble those causes on a piece of paper. You're going to need that when we go into breakout rooms. But again, your goal right now is just to listen to me read this story, scribble down those causes as you hear them, and then we're going to use that tool to kind of take it a step further when you're in those breakout rooms. All right, so here we go. I'm going to move some things around on my screen so I can see this. Alphonse the camel. Once upon a time, there was a camel called Alphonse. For various reasons related to an unfortunate incident during his birth, the camel had severe back problems. This is not the end of his misfortune, however, because he also had an evil, exploitative owner called Frank the camel killer. Frank had hated camels ever since he had experienced a nasty incident in his childhood involving a camel's hoof and his rear end. He was very bitter and hadn't trusted camels since. Frank regularly overloaded his camels prior to taking them on grueling and totally unnecessary road trips up and down the mountains on his way to deliver goods to his customers. These customers, shockingly, were completely indifferent to these frequent and gross violations of the rights of camels, even found Frank and his antics vaguely endearing. On top of it all, Alphonse was sometimes his own worst enemy. Camels were very proud creatures, and he would act tough in front of his camel friends. And on his rare breaks, he would show off how much he could carry. Plenty of camels had died doing similar work to Alphonse and his friends. After a particularly nasty few weeks, when camels were keeling over left, right, and center, the camels decided to form a union to defend their rights and protect them from evil owners. However, when it comes down to it, camels are selfish creatures who don't trust each other. They were more worried about looking after themselves than about working together, and the union soon fizzled out. One Friday, Frank had just finished loading up Alphonse and his poor, exploited fellow creatures for yet another grueling and totally unnecessary round trip up and down the mountains. He had piled and piled and piled up the goods on the Alphonse's back and was taking a break, chewing a straw, thinking smugly about his handiwork. On a whim, he decided to add the bedraggled straw. Okay, that's exactly. Or sorry about that. To add the bedraggled straw he had been chewing on to Alphonse's load. Alphonse groaned obligingly. He eyed his owner with disgust. He keeled over and died of radical and irreversible back collapse. And that is the end. So that is the story of Alphonse. And if you were following along, you were kind of scribbling down some of those causes, you're going to get a copy of that. And I'm sorry, I'm out of step with the chat. You're going to get a copy of that story and the causation tool in the chat in a second. And with that, there we go, right on cue. What I want you to do is I want you to quickly review that story again. If you missed anything, it's going to be right there for you in the text. And when that is all done, you are going to spend the next, let's say, 15 minutes or so with your small group, really diving in. You're going to pick one person to be your scribe for this time in breakout rooms, and they're going to be charged with recording some of those things that you're going to see on the tool. First, you're going to start off by breaking those, or I guess first you're going to start off by norming on the causes that you identified as you heard the story. If anyone missed something that you picked up, go ahead and share that. Make sure you guys have a complete list. Next, you're going to move on to sorting those into the different categories. And if you have time, if you want to apply one of the lenses from the bottom of the tool, you'll have an opportunity to do that as well. 1 to 15 minutes is up, we're going to come back whole group, and I'm going to have a chance, or you're going to have a chance to share with everyone some of those bigger ideas from this document. Obviously, you want to hear about your experience exploring that story and the tool, but we also want to get an idea of how you might be thinking about using this in your classroom. So that is going to be your task for the next 15 minutes. We are going to be floating around in the breakout rooms to offer any assistance you may need, but the time is yours and your groups to work on this activity and to get some experience trying it out. And at that, we have rooms open, ready to go, and we will see you guys in those groups. Thank you. Okay, so let's jump in. Looks like we got all our folks back. Here's my first question for folks. We have some idea of the group dynamic here, or like how you guys were broken up, but no need to kind of rely on that. We're going to just do a whole group share. My first question is, could someone share with me some of the causes that you found in your review? I'm looking for a volunteer to kind of do a thorough run through of where they landed in terms of causes. And then I'm not calling someone else to kind of add another layer if there's something that was missed. And I'm gonna look at the chat and cold call someone because that's still a fun thing for me to do this Tuesday afternoon. I'm gonna go with Ryan because your headset makes me jealous.
Well, I'm not sure. Doing Zooms in cubicle land is great, so that's why I got the headset on. So I'm not sure. Our group, we looked to the link that showed the 14 different causes that students might come up with. So we just kind of went through that.
Mhm.
We did a little bit of sharing of, as the story was read and some of the causes, but then we jumped to that because all of them were there. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question. I don't know if that's maybe we cheated the system by looking, but like I didn't have 14 causes down. And as a group, we went through those causes. There were some things we thought were maybe irrelevant, and they weren't necessarily. We couldn't really see them fitting in any category. They just really didn't. They weren't really a cause. So I don't know if I dodged your question or answered
No,
it.
you kind of did. It's all right. You let us know that you cheated. It's all good. No, but like, so going back, that second layer you applied to it, things that you felt were irrelevant. Can you share like at least one of those examples, like something you thought was irrelevant after looking at that list of 14?
So like the ninth one on that list was Alphonse had trouble carrying heavy objects. I think that was one that we thought it was just irrelevant. He had back problems from birth and that sort of thing. That seemed relevant, and that was a long-term cause, but that he had trouble carrying heavy objects didn't seem relevant to his death. Now, it could have been symptomatic or whatever, but it didn't seem causal. I guess that was a discussion that we kind of got into and then moved on.
Okay. All good. All right. So let's move on to the next layer of this. I'm looking for someone to share where their group landed in terms of short-term causes. And I'm going to ask Jennifer Cole to jump in. Are you okay, Jennifer, to jump in?
Ryan and I were in the same group. I don't know if that matters. I didn't always speak up when there were some things I thought were more short term, that sometimes the group put as long term or intermediate. So, what
do you got?
I'm trying to think of what was one of the examples without going back to the other paper. Maybe the long trips, the repeated long trips. I think.
And that felt like short term to you?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. And I won't. I'll mix up a little bit in about the next person, but thank you for that. And you want to jump in?
For our classification?
Yeah, if you can give us a couple more of those short-term causes you guys landed on.
Our short-term list included, of course, the straw that broke the camel's back. The last unnecessary trip. So maybe to build on what Jennifer was saying, for some of those things that, we thought were a little bit debatable. We thought, maybe like the overall pattern of taking these long distance trips was long-term, but that, last trip up the mountain in which Alphonse was overburdened, overloaded, that could perhaps be short-term.
Cool. Thank you for that. I am going to jump to another category because I'm starting to see how those fall. I'm super curious if anyone identified anything as a triggering event. Anyone got that far? What was a triggering event in your group's perspective? And John, you want to jump in?
We had that straw.
It's like that old adage, right? Like it feels like it's staring you right in the face. Anyone went a different way with it? Felt that the straw was not the triggering event. This is a raise a digital hand or call out if you'd like.
Oh, the straw was kind of the fun metaphor part, but it was the original load that he was putting him on that you could say was the original triggering event.
Okay. So difference opinion. One person went with straw, one person went with the load that that went before it. Cool. So we got a couple different ideas here, and I think a couple things to kind of circle back to, because now that we've stepped out of the activity itself, let's talk about the process for a little bit. Every time I see adults engage in this activity, it's always super interesting to see how it goes. Sometimes there is some heated conversations about this camel and the way he was treated. Sometimes there's kind of straightforward lining up of causes and sorting of those causes. When you're looking at this activity, I heard a couple of things come up, but I'm curious if anything else popped up in your group, what are some things that you might be considering when you're rolling this out or prior to rolling this out for your students? Things that you might want to go deep on, things that you might want to circle back and explain before you roll out the activity. What's something you might do there to support your students? And I'm going to get the ball rolling by calling to someone who I heard in the group. Ron, if you don't mind, I was listening, you shared a little bit about the kind of definitions that were in play there. Can you articulate that to the group?
Sure. So we were talking about, because we stumbled on that short-term, intermediate, and long-term, and then we'd seen that earlier in the paper it had kind of defined that. But one of the things we talked about was that defining that clearly of the expectations for the kids, or even just letting them hash that out themselves. That part of that, it's the discussion happening that can be important. And that some things could be, kind of bridge both short-term and long-term. So like, that's one of the things we talked about. And because the document had said like short-term was from an instant to a lifetime, we decided to define short-term as Alphonse's lifetime, which then let us put his owner and the things having to do with his owner more in the intermediate category, because his owner probably lived longer than he did. Was kind of the discussion that we had.
Yeah, no, and that's what I gravitate towards. I think the elasticity of those terms are super important to grapple before students have those questions in those small groups. Being able to kind of land on working definitions or even examples of each of those things in the context of Alphonse's life or Campbell's life or something else that works as a straw man for this type of activity. It's really important to kind of help students understand that prior to rolling it out. It's really great to hear folks discussing that. Also, I think it's similar to those qualifiers at the bottom, contributing, primary, underlying, triggering. Like, these are all things that you want to make sure folks have a good idea of what you're talking about or what you're looking for before they, get into a conflict with folks in your small group trying to figure this out. Helpful to provide that level of support before it goes out there. What else? So when you're reflecting on this activity, how it looked like for you and your group, what other things come up in terms of implementation in the classroom, challenges your students might have, questions that they may ask, things that can be an easy win for you when you're thinking about upcoming units?
I'd be happy to share out.
Sure.
So one of the things that I mentioned and that we talked about is that it generally, this, like with a lot of historical thinking skills, it's stuff that you want to bring in relatively early with students. And I think starting with something as complex as World War I is really difficult, and you would have to do a lot of scaffolding and front loading those skills before you get to that. So I think there are two building blocks that we talked about. One is implementing early so they get used to this type of like historiography and not just kind of level one thinking. And the other thing that I mentioned was that there's a base level of knowledge that students have to have before they can engage in this sort of higher level thinking. And so those can be kind of the roadblocks, is if you don't introduce it in a context that's easy for kids to grapple with and isn't too complex. And then the second thing is to just sort of guide them through it, make sure that they're supported, but make sure also that they have that level one kind of basic depth of knowledge so you can build on it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm sorry, I don't see. Tell me who just said that.
David.
Sorry, David. I got like a sea of Davids in front of me, but thank you, David, for sharing it out. A couple of things that are super important to kind of double down on. First, I think what I heard you say that I think is another super important thing to kind of note is that it's those sub skills. This is an example of a sub skill activity that's content adjacent or content agnostic that still allows students in inroads to grapple with these skills that are coming down the road. And the careful placement of those early on in the course can really allow a student to have the building blocks they need to grapple with these activities later when they're looking at a source that's seminal for a unit of study. So I think that's a really great thing to kind of notice and to utilize as you incorporate. Another thing that David mentioned I think is important to say as well is like the background knowledge that is required to engage with these causation activities later in the year or in your units. Important to kind of think through and puzzle through before you roll it out, just so you have an understanding of the misconceptions that may pop up in those group discussions. The tool does a good job of helping kind of identify that. So we'll see in a second one of the things you can utilize with this tool or any causation activity to kind of make sure all the information that is needed is coming out of those moments, and you have an idea of how to provide feedback and support a student as they progress throughout the unit. But we'll pause there on kind of the review of the activity. We're having an opportunity in a second to go back in there, but I want to move on to another tool that I think is going to be super helpful. So this is going to be a checklist that some of the folks at the OER project put together to assist educators. I think the first thing to note here is that we know that when it comes to writing, when it comes to any kind of activity in the classroom, providing frequent and thoughtful feedback to students is going to be a super important part of the process that they're going to engage in from going from good to great. And we also know that one of the challenges there is being able to do a thing like this for all the students that you work with. So we want to kind of ease the burden by providing this checklist. This is a really great tool that you can utilize in this tool. This is a tool that can be utilized in an activity like Alphonse. You can use this in writing activities as you guys go deeper into exploring causation. But the idea ultimately is to help a student identify in that written work gaps, areas of success, so that they can move on and kind of edit they can edit that work and turn it back in, or for that next activity, have a better idea of how they can be better at the process of identifying causation or those causal links in an activity or an event exploration. So Megan dropped the link to this in the chat, so you have this. What we're going to do now is we are going to revisit the activity that we just went through. You're going to have an opportunity to look at an exemplar that someone put together. It's a student exemplar. So the idea here is that this is probably going to be one of your more struggling students when it comes to grappling with an activity around causation. We want you to think about interventions. This is usually where we spend a lot of our kind of brain power towards the end of our sessions, because it's not just enough to hear me talk about this. It's not just enough to hear or to review an activity. We also want to think about this in the context of your classroom. How can we best support students who are grappling or struggling with causation? So you have the checklist. I believe if you don't already, you will soon have the student exemplar. And then we're going to put you back in the same groups. And we want you to take some time to look at that activity, see those student responses, and then think about the best interventions that will be supportive of the student, so that when they have a chance to review your feedback, they can keep on moving from good to great. So you've got both of those things in the chat right now. Thank you, Megan, for dropping that. And then we are going to open up rooms again. We're going to give you 15 minutes to review and to discuss. And we'll come back whole group and we'll share out some of your thoughts about interventions that can be supportive for those students. If you have any questions, we'll bounce around like we did before, but we look forward to hearing your thoughts about this. We can come back in 15 minutes. Thanks, folks. Hey, folks. All right, we're getting folks together bit by bit. Love it. And for more of our friends to join us, but I've put my thumb on the scale a bit. I'm going to ask Katie to get us started with a share out about what her group discussed, and then we'll bounce around and see if anyone else adds some more fuel to the fire. And now we got a party. Everyone's coming back. Yay!
Yeah, our group talked about a lot of different pieces, kind of different ways to allow the students to connect the different events. Everything from like a Jenga tower, like putting the events on a Jenga thing, to using cards so that the kids are able to move the cards around. And then towards the end, we were talking about ideas like more structured, like a timeline, or maybe even a pyramid, or letting the kids come up with their own shape to kind of show different impacts around from the different events within the story.
Yeah. I think like the kind of, I don't know, kinesthetic nature of that like really makes me happy. I was always someone who likes old school, scribbling stuff on notes, moving things around, crossing out things, highlighting, that kind of thing. And I think that level of manipulation when it comes to this kind of stuff is super helpful, because it helps folks not just move things to a place where you can see the significance laid out in front of them. You also have an opportunity to kind of add more inputs, take things away in a way that kind of helps a small group can engage with a topic more so than if it's just living on someone's individual sheet. or I'm sorry, worksheet. But awesome, great. I also heard from group 3, Sandy, if you don't mind, I was really curious. You guys were talking a little bit about like some of the what the gaps you saw missing in the worksheet. Specifically, you mentioned the lack of detail, a little bit about the partner aspect of it, or lack thereof. You mind sharing some of that with the whole group?
Did you say Sandy?
I did. Sorry. So Sandy, I know Rhonda was in that group. I might have
Yep.
missed.
I'll speak on behalf of Sandy. He had to go pick up his kid real quick.
Oh, my bad. Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, we had mentioned that when the first thing we did as a group was really just come up with a list of pretty basic causes without a whole lot of nuance or detail. And
Okay.
what really got us talking about a lot of that nuance was when we were bouncing ideas off of each other and talking. So we had just wondered if this is an example from someone who went through this on his or her own, or were they part of a group? Maybe, if they would have been in a group, would they have maybe gotten a little bit deeper and a little bit more explanation in there?
Yeah, I totally agree. This is one of those activities specifically that, obviously there's some depth there, but I think that the narrative nature of it is kind of perfect for a group to discuss and kind of dive into. When you're siloed off, it might not have the same impact. So I can definitely see this being an activity that someone's able to add more detail and depth if they're, able to bounce those ideas off of somebody else before it ends up being turned in. So it could be a really great scaffold for someone, not scaffold, I'm sorry, it was support for someone in the process next time, giving them an opportunity to work with a small group before they submit. So like now we're spiraling out. Any other additional interventions that you or your group decided on to support the student next time around?
I think we talked, if I can add, I think Ann had this idea about using the checklist as a way to have a discussion about causation, as a way of kind of processing the story. Was that it, Ann? Or Katie? Was that?
Yeah, it's tough because this is just an intro activity, so you're not really expecting a lot of sophistication from students. But if you could maybe follow it up with some kind of element from the checklist to give students a lens into how they're going to make these skills more sophisticated with their use of causation throughout the course. And then I think Katie mentioned that there might be some implications for standards-based grading as well. Like maybe you could just pull out some little nuggets from the checklist each time to direct students' focus for the activity.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I totally agree. Like, I think the checklist is interesting because, if just like any of the checklists that we look at, there's an opportunity to use it before, during, and after the actual activity itself. Really innovative folks who've come in these trainings before have discussed this idea of proactively giving students some transparent view into checklists so they understand like what you're looking for. We have some folks who are kind of talking about like that being a support as they're in those small groups. And ultimately, like the kind of initial construction of it is reactively giving it to students with your insight so they can support them next time they come and engage in an activity like this. So a couple different uses for a checklist beyond just a kind of support of an educator. Love the thoughts around that as well. All right. We're going to keep moving to the last part of this, and we're thinking now about like how we can make classroom implication a little bit easier for folks as they push past our training tonight. First, I want to kind of show folks another tool that's in the mix. This is a causal map. If you're familiar with our course, if you're familiar with activities around causation, you'll know that this is a really, really helpful tool to utilize in a couple of different ways to support students thinking about causation when we're exploring these events. First thing to note is that these come in a couple of different forms. Some are completely filled out and it's meant to be reviewed. Others have bits missing, like the consequences usually on the right side. Some are completely blank and you're utilizing that just for students to pull those ideas out of a small group like you engaged in a first breakout, and then commit it to a document like this, a blank map like this, so they can better make sense of what is explored. So there are a couple different ways to look at it, but it is really helpful for students so they can avoid a couple different things it gives them a push to be more detail oriented when they're thinking about causation, but also it kind of helps us avoid monocausal thinking. Like if you're looking at a document like this, it's a little bit harder to say that one singular thing caused an event. It really allows some space for students to expand and think more about some other things that could have also contributed to this larger event that we're exploring. With the push from the educator always being that there's seldom an event where there's just one cause or one, catalyst. There's usually more than that, and giving them a space for this is usually really helpful for that. Okay, so moving on to like the larger list of tips and tricks. This is something we want to share with folks. This will be sent out in our follow-up as well, so you can see this, but helpful for you to kind of see what we kind of collected both from the folks who helped design our approach to causation, but also some folks from our OER community that had some thoughts about this as they worked through this over the years with their students. I won't read this all to you. I'll just give you a chance to check it out. But a couple things to note: we just went over that causal map, and we identified monocausal thinking being something for folks to avoid, and whatever tools can be helpful for that. I.e., the causal map is really great to fix or mitigate that. Last thing I'd say is that when you're looking at the checklist, really think about like what makes the most sense for you when you're incorporating such a tool into your classroom and your practice. For some folks, this is just a lot of documentation for them to maintain, and we understand that. Maybe you're chunking it, maybe you're making it a little bit more abbreviated. This, like any other resource on our site, is available PDF or Word. You can edit this, you can change this, you can make this work for you. We're not beholden to one specific way. We really want to be here to support whichever way makes the most sense. So yeah, like I said, a couple things to note when you're thinking about this, tips and tricks, but it doesn't stop there. We've got a couple different things for you to consider in your next steps. First, we want to note that after each of our Skills Clinic sessions, there is a space for conversation to continue on our online community. We call it In Focus Posts, and this one is specifically on causation. A couple questions we want you guys to think about when you're moving past this session into our community and everything comes afterwards. First, we want you to think about like, what does causation look like in your classroom? Think about that in terms of lessons, think about in terms of artifacts or documents that you're utilizing. Think about this as a space for you to share your successes and also any additional tips or tricks that are helpful for you. The community, if you're not familiar, is if I had to describe it, it's like it's a combination of like Reddit and Twitter, but only without all the toxicity. You have an online collection of educators from around the world who are really just there to hear and to support. Your share could be the thing to help someone in a district far from yours understand a topic or a skill a little bit better. So think about this as an opportunity for that. Folks share pictures of documents, folks share insight, they respond to questions. We want you to be a part of the mix. These questions are a great first step, but don't let that stop you from engaging any further when it comes to causation or anything else that you find in our community as you look around. And I think Megan probably shared the link to that. I closed the chat. Apologies. Well, there we go. So yeah, there it is right there. So you have a direct link, and then again, our follow-up, you're going to get another link to that so you can have that close if you need it. And lastly, just want to say thank you. We are, again, closing this opportunity of discussion, but that doesn't mean that long-term we don't have more opportunities for us to connect and to engage on this topic. The survey link that you're going to see in the chat in a second is a great opportunity for us to get an idea of what you're thinking, any thoughts you have about this topic or any others. We'd love to get that feedback from you. Also, you have an email to our events inbox. So if anything comes up about your engagement today or question you have, feel free to shoot us an email. We love to connect with folks who are attending our sessions. We love to get that feedback. We love to continue to support you whichever way we can. So use that to, we'll use those two things, the survey and the email address, to help us connect with you and keep the learning going. But that is more or less all we have today. We are I'm gonna stick around for a little longer if anybody has any questions, but for anyone else, once you're able to finish that survey, we'll see you next time. thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you in our community. See you, folks.